Okay, so we have begun the recording as well as live streaming. So let's start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, depending on where you're joining from. I welcome you today to today's webinar hosted by World Resources Institute India and International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. Before we begin, I just want to share a few information and rules for the day. Please keep yourself on mute when not speaking. The webinar will be for 1.5 hours and it is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. For any questions that come up during the session, please use the chat box or the Q&A box, which is right below. Our distinguished speakers will try to answer some of them parallelly. Also, I would request the moderator to pick a few of the questions at the end of the discussion and pose it to the speakers. The webinar is going to be available for public viewing on social media platforms. And if anyone has any feedback to give, please drop a mail to indiaenergyteam@wri.org. And all our updates is actually going to be on YouTube, on our LinkedIn page, as well as on our Twitter page. So these are some of the housekeeping rules for the day. And with this note, I welcome you all again to today's webinar. I will now request Namrata Ginua, Senior Program Manager, Energy and Resilience, WRI India, to share her introductory remarks. Over to you, Namrata.
Hello, everyone. I'll give a very brief intro to the topic of discussion today. Food, water, and energy. These are the three, key elements and commodities without which humans cannot survive. Yet globally, 2 billion people lack access to safe drinking water, 1 billion lack access to electricity, and I'm not talking about reliable electricity, that will be even more, and another billion face chronic food deprivation. I'm not raining on anyone's parade when I say that visible and projected climate change, increasing population, changing consumption patterns will put more and more pressure on delivering food, water, and energy equitably. As an emerging economy, India's energy consumption needs to increase by 250% to reach even middle income levels of human development. And at present, this energy production itself depends heavily on water. When we talk about water, India is one of the most water-stressed countries in the world that depends hugely on groundwater to irrigate its field. Importance of agriculture in feeding the nation and growing the economy, all of this makes it extremely vulnerable to the pressures of the nexus interactions, especially under climate change. Traditionally, these interactions, we can see, how they've been studied independently. The relationship between electricity supply and irrigation, water needs for electricity production, or irrigation requirement for reducing crop failure, so on. Currently, energy consumption linked to grid diesel-powered irrigation pumps is significant. The grid supply for agriculture is massively subsidized, while diesel use then again burdens the farmer. So with India gearing up to fulfill its 500 gigawatts by 2030 ambition that it set out in COP26, programs that support solar-based irrigation systems have taken center stage. Now, approaches that we design now and at this point in time towards utilizing water will determine how resilient our food production systems are under uncertain temperature, under uncertain precipitation patterns. On one hand, we have changing rainfall patterns, existing energy subsidies, energy pricing structures, and increasing area under water intensive crops. All of this, which has severely depleted our groundwater levels in majority of the states. While on the other hand, access to irrigation is first level adaptation mechanism we need to deploy to secure our food production. With 50% of our agricultural land still being rain-fed, deployment of solar irrigation pumps can increase farm productivity. and also incomes. For current users, conventional funds, the savings on fuel-based recurring costs itself will be very significant. Solar pumps can also help farmers generate income if policies allow the farmers to feed the grid. Collectively, all of this can not only help improve irrigation access, but also support the country become energy secure. And this discussion should not be limited to irrigation. Solar-based energy inputs can help reduce food loss and waste throughout the food value chain, and it can also help decarbonize it. Decarbonization of food production systems needs to bring in new areas under irrigation in the now, while also planning for food security, energy security for the future. Focus needs to be on designing policies that not only support all of these goals, but are also acceptable to farmers, are acceptable to current energy providers and emerging clean energy markets. I'll close by adding that the interactions between the food, water, energy, all of these three nexus items are influenced heavily by climate, environmental, social, economic, and political systems. So we need to understand the influence of these systems on the nexus, and that can help researchers and decision makers plan better for management of these resources. Yeah, I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Namrata, for your opening remarks. Now I'll request Ute Collier, Deputy Director, Knowledge Policy and Finance Center, International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, to share her opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of IRENA. We're very pleased to partner with WRI on this important and timely topic. Now, Namrata has already given you a really good introduction to the water, food, energy nexus, especially in relation to India. But of course, many of the things she said about India are as relevant in many developing countries. Globally, the agriculture sector accounts for about a third of all energy used. But we still see in many countries, especially, of course, across Africa, but also developing Asia, that energy access is a key constraint for the growth of agriculture in many of these countries. So we've already heard primary production, processing, storage, but also even on the cooking side. And we see renewable energy solutions, not just solar, increasingly offering an opportunity to deliver energy services in an environmentally sustainable, affordable, and decentralized manner across the agri-food value chain. So solar irrigation, of course, is at the intersection of the water, energy, and food sector and can provide improved access, which is obviously particularly important at this stage where we're seeing changing rainfall patterns across many countries. And we, of course, have a growing population as well. So we do urgently need to unlock yield improvements and incomes. So when we then look at policy and programs to achieve that, we definitely need to see a nexus perspective, because it isn't just a matter of, energy policy or agriculture policy. We need it all to come together to allow us to benefit, to achieve the maximum benefits in terms of socioeconomic and environmental aspects. So we do need a holistic approach to policy making on solar irrigation and water, food, energy nexus more broadly. So IRENA has been working on this for some time. For example, in 2016, we published a policy brief that analyzed how policies and financial incentives can be designed to scale up solar irrigation, while at the same time ensuring sustainability across sectors. We've since then taken this further. Many of you will already be aware we've got a partnership with the FAO, where we signed a memorandum of understanding last year, specifically to accelerate the adoption of renewables in the agri-food sector. And we launched a report at COP26 on this, and after my remarks, we will, in addition to WRI's working paper, we will give you a brief overview of the paper, and of course solar irrigation is one of the solutions that features in there. In terms of India, of course, it's particularly interesting to look at the Indian case study. I mean, if we're looking at solar pump capacity in agriculture globally, we've seen a 10-fold increase between 2014 and 2019, so the latest data we have. And nearly all of this growth has been in Asia, with India being a key market. So it's very timely to hear the launch of WRI's working paper, and I look forward to hearing some of the lessons learned from the various policies and programs in India. It'll be of great relevance to policymakers and development partners. And for us at IRENA, it's particularly relevant just now because we recently joined a strategic partnership agreement with the Indian government at our assembly in January. And it identifies knowledge sharing from India on scaling up renewable energy and clean energy technologies as a key area of cooperation. We're already aware that India has made impressive progress on both renewable energy and energy efficiency, making it more affordable, more accessible with some innovative business models. So this webinar is a great opportunity to already exchange some knowledge with IRENA member states as well, and increase awareness on the technology options that are available. So in conclusion, I would like to first of all express my thanks to our colleagues from WRI for partnering with us on this event, and thank you for our speakers. I think we've got a very interesting panel discussion coming, and I look forward to our discussions today. And hopefully we will come out identifying some concrete ideas for all stakeholders to act on, and for us at IRENA, and of course also at WRI and jointly with FAO to take forward. So I'll pass back now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for setting the context for the day. Now I would request Divyam Nagpal, Program Officer, Energy Access Policy and Finance Center from IRENA, to share the overview and key findings of the report, Renewable Energy for Agri-Food Systems. This report has been jointly developed by IRENA and Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Over to you, Divyam.
Thanks very much. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect, great. Thanks so much for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody joining in. Great pleasure for me to sort of showcase some of the work that IRENA has been doing on the topic of renewable energy for agri-food systems, specifically looking at solar irrigation together with a number of our partners, in particular the FAO. I think broadly the context has already been set in the opening remarks, so I will not repeat the numbers, but just to say that the agri-food sector, the agriculture sector, is a major energy consumer globally, and this is something that we are seeing, reflect also in regional and national energy trends. But I think something that's been interesting is that if you look at the energy consumption in agriculture sector across different regions globally, over the past 2 decades in Asia, it has grown quite significantly, and it has seen robust growth. But at the same time, in places like Africa, we've seen almost stagnant growth, almost stagnancy in energy consumption in the agriculture sector. So it really presents us with 2 key challenges from an energy perspective. When we think about the socioeconomic development and growth of agriculture, is that there is a significant energy gap that still needs to be filled up in developing Asia, but also in continents like Africa. across the agri-food value chain to stimulate growth, reduce losses, increase incomes, but also at the same time where energy is already being used in great quantity in agriculture sector, primarily through fossil fuels. How do we sort of engage in an energy transition discussion to reduce emissions, to increase resilience, and improve inclusivity of access? So there really is sort of a twofold energy access or energy challenge that we must address. And as Ute mentioned, we see that renewable energy can play an important role at almost each segment of the agri-food value chain, to provide tailored energy services in different contexts. So at IRENA, we've been working on the food energy nexus for quite a number of years across a number of thematic areas, looking at technology specific analysis, whether it's looking at bioenergy, looking at geothermal in agri-food sector, looking at solar irrigation, but also assessment of benefits, so quantifying some of the impacts that renewables can have in the agriculture sector across social, environmental, health, and other indicators, looking at data and statistics, but also a lot of work around regional agri value chain assessment. So recently we've partnered with ICIMOD and Selco Foundation to undertake energy assessments of various agri-food chains in the Hindu-Kush Himalaya region, and that report will be out soon. And we've also been working through our membership and as well as through our capacity building and advocacy work across various platforms to highlight this important link between food and energy, and by extension as well to water, and the rationale for looking at things more holistically. One of the key partnerships that we've engaged in, as Uday mentioned, has been with the FAO, where we signed an MOU early last year. The first outcome of that MOU was, in fact, a report that we launched at COP last year, which really brought together, both from the food perspective and as well as from the energy perspective, what opportunities renewable energy presents to meet various energy needs, both in the developing market context, but also in the developed market context. We did a sort of in-focus assessment on solar irrigation, but also renewables-based cold storage, renewables-based agro-processing, but also sustainable bioenergy and the use of residues, for instance. The report is available online, but what it concludes with is really a sort of a 8-point action agenda to scale up renewables adoption in agriculture. These will not, these may not surprise you, but essentially really talk about sort of improving the data and information base to guide decision making, access to financing, utilizing mapping tools increasingly to improve, to inform sustainability oriented decision making, facilitating integrated food energy systems, ecosystems for technologies and appliances. So not just about renewables, but also about the appliances around pumps, processing equipments, awareness raising, capacity building, but also really placing inclusivity at the heart of energy and food systems transformation. Essentially looking at gender perspectives, but also engagement of youth and marginalized communities. IRENA and FAO have also signed an energy compact, which was presented at the high-level dialogue on energy last year, where we've committed over the next 5 years to undertake several agri-food system assessments at both national and regional level, but also support pilot programs and projects, working in partnership with a number of local and regional actors. And we have Olivier Dubois here from the FAO, and we'd be very interested in sort of taking a conversation forward on any proposals where we can work together on this topic. Just jumping to solar irrigation, a lot of the benefits, both for the farmers as well as the governments, have already been alluded to. So I will not repeat in terms of improved access to water, yields, income generations, reduced subsidies, and all of that. And as Ute mentioned, solar pumps have seen a significant growth over the past decade. Majority of that has been in Asia, driven by strong policy and program support. We've seen that in India, but also in neighboring countries, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, where solar pumps have been sort of deployed and supported through various forms of policies. But there is significant untapped potential both in Asia, but also in Africa, where a significant share of the farming is still very much rain-fed. So finally, just a few points that came out of the analysis that we did a few years back on solar pumping for irrigation, where we try to sort of think about it from a more nexus perspective. I think just a few highlights there. I think one of the most important things has been that there is no one size fits all approach. We are seeing globally a lot of innovation, a lot of flexibility in terms of the delivery models for solar irrigation solutions, from individual ownership to community ownership to fee for service models to varying capacities. So that sort of flexibility and innovation is important to tailor to the local context and existing practices. Financial instrument design, we've seen a very sort of heavy capex subsidy approach, which has sort of implications for long-term sustainability for the market. But we've also seen examples of within the region as well on mixing capital subsidies with other forms of credit to unlock, improve accessibility and improve sustainability. And increasingly, at least in East Africa, we are seeing the sort of adaptation of the pay-as-you-go model to solar pumps and solar irrigation, which again is quite interesting. So financial instruments becomes an important piece to tackle the affordability gap. Something that we're seeing a lot is sort of this need to invest in an ecosystem. So rather than just the tech, the initial capex, the need to sort of invest in after-sales support, awareness raising, market access, especially where additional yield is being unlocked through additional cropping cycles, where without market access and without storage, without processing, we may not be able to unlock the full spectrum of socioeconomic benefits. Capacity building, placing again water constraints and water resources at the center of the ecosystem and seeing what impact these programs can have on water use over the long term. How can we sort of package energy and water efficient solutions together, and what experience has been around that in terms of both stacking, but also the long-term operation of those water efficient solutions. Looking at how over the long term solar irrigation affects farmer behavior in terms of what crops are grown and also water use. Finally, I think given the sort of nascent nature of the solution and technology itself, importance of monitoring performance and gathering and reporting on data around each of these parameters becomes important for future policy and program design. And finally, really looking at a multi-stakeholder approach that sort of engages stakeholders across from energy, agriculture, and the water sectors to design these programs. So I'm sure the study and the paper from WRI will sort of touch upon these points and bring out much more details on what India's experience has been in tackling each of these different elements. And we look forward to that discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Devin, for that really insightful presentation. Next, we have the working paper release. Tamil Nadu is a focus state under the Sustainable Energy Transition, or SET initiative, which is a joint effort of WRI India, Auroville Consulting and Citizen, Consumer and Civic Action Group, CHE. The working paper, titled Learnings from Tamil Nadu from Grid-Connected Agricultural Solar Photovoltaic Schemes in India, aimed at collating best practices from other states and replicating them in Tamil Nadu for a successful solarized irrigation under KUSUM scheme. Let us together release the working paper developed by WRI India.
Sorry, there's a small launch video which is going to be played, so kindly bear with us.
Over to you, Deepak, now.
Thanks, Ahona, and kindly bear with me while I share my screen. Yeah, I hope it's visible to everyone.
Yes, it is.
Thanks. So welcome once again to everyone, and thank you for staying with us as we launch this paper. As Ahana mentioned, Tamil Nadu is a key focus state for WRI as we work with our partners on ground, Auroville Consulting and Citizen Consumer and Civic Action Group under the Sustainable Energy Transitions Initiative. And my thanks to the IRENA team and all the speakers and Olivier, who has agreed to moderate this session, for joining us, and to all the participants. So Divyam touched upon solar irrigation, and as Uday rightly mentioned, solar irrigation is a small part of the entire food, water, energy nexus. And even within that solar irrigation scheme, our focus is on a particular state, on a particular component. So you can see how much of slicing and dicing we would need to do. And it is indeed a vast area. So just to give you a bit of a background, many of you would know that agriculture is a source of livelihood for 58% of India's population. The subsidized electricity supply has affected the financial health. So if you see the first graph on the right, you will see that roughly 30 to 35% is the ratio of recovery by the electricity supply companies. And this kind of shows in the average daily hours of supply, which we try to map across different states. So it barely manages to touch 10 hours in a day. And the other factor is that a lot of times this energy supply happens only during the early morning or in the late night hours. So inevitably, farmers end up leaving the feeders switched on because there is unpredictability about this supply. And therefore there is no control over how much of water is drawn from the ground. This also corresponds directly to the phenomenal increase in tube well irrigation across India over the last few years. Now, some of the states have already recognized this situation and saw the opportunity for solar-powered irrigation pump sets to come in and help reduce this subsidy gap that is coming in because of the highly subsidized supply to the agriculture sector. Some of the examples are the Sky scheme in Gujarat. Andhra Pradesh had a pilot scheme with a brushless DC pump set. Now, the PM Kusum scheme that was announced in 2019 has in effect elevated this conversation to a national level. So while there were these individual state schemes that I spoke about earlier, this PM Kusum scheme, as we'll see in the next slide, is really massive and takes us to a huge scale in terms of 10,000 megawatts of decentralized ground level or stilt mounted grid connected solar, or under component B, which aims at solarizing standalone agriculture pump sets, about 17.5 lakh, and then solarization of about 10 lakh grid connected agriculture pumps, which are already being provided connection from the local utility. Now, each state is free to choose. They have been assigned targets, of course, but each state can choose which scheme they want to implement. Even within the state of focus, that is Tamil Nadu, while there is component C, which is the focus of this paper, with a target of about 20,000 pumps, there are two other agencies also responsible for component A, that is the utility, and component B, which is the agriculture department of the state, and each is proceeding in its own path. So Ahona and I briefly touched upon this project, so I'll not focus on this again. So this paper, as I mentioned earlier, focuses on these three schemes: the Surya Shakti Kisan Yojana in Gujarat, the Surya Raita scheme in Karnataka. Raita means farmer in Kannada, and the solar BLDC pump pilot in Andhra Pradesh. What we did was we looked at the benefits and challenges for the three categories of stakeholders: farmers, discoms, and the state governments. And based on this, we derived some of the recommendations for Tamil Nadu. Of course, the paper goes into detail talking about the technical design of each scheme. We summarize some of the regulatory filings which capture the cost benefit analysis, how the incentives were derived, what was the share of capex that had to come from the central government, the share from the state government, what was supposed to be the farmer's share. So all those details are available in the paper, but for purposes of this discussion, I'll just focus on the methodology and the key learnings. So the selection of states itself, we followed a 3-level of filtering criteria. We looked at states that have notified policies promoting the use of distributed solar. We looked at states which either have a free power supply or subsidized, highly subsidized, rates of electricity to agriculture. And last, we filtered out states which have schemes that are like the Kusum component C, which is solarization of the individual grid, existing grid connected pump set. So these were the 3 criteria used to identify and land upon the 3 schemes that I mentioned earlier. We then looked at the government policies, orders, regulatory filings, regulatory orders, any M&E reports that were available, and also any media articles that were also if anyone had documented some of these things. And where possible and where there was willingness to talk, we also conducted some stakeholder consultation. So some of the key insights from the 3 states, and again, I would like to draw your attention to what Divyam mentioned earlier about one size, there not being a one size fits all kind of solution. So even though the points in this slide provide a brief overview and summary of what are the similarities within the schemes, what must be kept in mind is that, for example, if I speak about a net metered solar PV based pump set, there is a certain ratio between the kilowatt of solar installation vis-a-vis the horsepower of a particular motor. That ratio varies across states. The size of the motors that were also considered for solarization also have varied. For example, Tamil Nadu has 7.5 HP. Gujarat, I think, had 5 and 7.5. So each state has looked at its farmer stakeholders and come up with these numbers. But the common factor was that these were all net metered solar PV based pump sets, and solar system sizing was permitted to be greater than or equal to the size of the irrigation pump set. And this is an essential component, because only then the farmer will be able to inject electricity back into the grid and gain financially out of the scheme, while also acting as a incentive to not pump excess water. Of course, each state has a different cost structure in its electricity network, in its consumer base, and therefore different levels of feed-in tariff have been determined. What is crucial, as we'll see in the next slide, is the adequacy of this. Across all states, raising financial contributions from farmers was a major challenge, and this is a reality that governments will need to work with. And again, Divyam mentioned about heavy capex subsidies being there, but given the reality of a small holding farmer and their financial situation and the extent of household debt that is also prevalent in India, definitely maybe initial phases there would need to be more of a government contribution than individual contributions coming in from farmers. Some of the learnings were that appropriate pricing of the FIT is important. Now, without that, just like as we have seen in rooftop solar or anything else, acceptance is going to be, very, very difficult. And in addition, also based on conversations that we are having and have had in Tamil Nadu, the key factor to note is that, farmers also need clarity on, for example, what would happen to their existing connections. Would they be taken out of the subsidy system that is currently prevalent? So being upfront about all these things is critical to build trust. And similarly, once subsidy has been committed to, timely and full payout of this subsidy is also crucial. We would also need to maintain some amount of regulatory certainty in terms of what would be the visibility of, let's say, the feed-in tariff or any incentive that is announced. And unless there is some very, very significant change on the ground, one shouldn't tinker around too much with that. Maintenance of the PV system, again, Divyam spoke about the ecosystem linkages. This was very crucial, and in particular, in the brushless DC scheme in Andhra Pradesh, we saw that concerns about maintenance were a big factor, which led to difficulty in acceptance. Last but not the least was the absence or the relative less importance given to monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework. What we have seen in the 3 schemes that we studied so far was an emphasis on, how many kilowatts or megawatts got added, how many kilowatt hours were injected into the grid. But there was no linkage to, let's say, looking at farmer incomes, no linkage to looking at, water table impacts. Now, even in Tamil Nadu, in the order that has been passed to, roll out the Kusum C scheme in the state, we found that there is a mention, of course, in the order saying that, while these systems are being set up, the linkages to water also needs to be considered. But we need to move beyond these statements and work across silos in governments to ensure that these systems are actually built, and there is a holistic thinking that comes into the system. Couple of limitations from this study. We would have loved to do a field visit too, but this was taken up during the time of the pandemic. So we would look to augment this study and maybe learn from the panelists and any of you to see how we could augment this with face-to-face interviews, looking at independent on-ground assessment of the outcomes, and look beyond the officially available documents. So thank you. Look forward to your feedback, and questions, and happy to listen to any suggestions on improving this paper. So thank you once again for being with us.
Thank you so much, Deepak, for sharing the insightful highlights from the paper. Now, moving on to the next part of the event, we will now have a panel discussion on the lessons from the policies and programs introduced to support solar irrigation solutions. Our experts will share their experience with us. The distinguished panel will be moderated by Olivier Dubois, Senior Natural Resources Officer and Leader, Energy Program, Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment, Food and Agricultural Organization. Our speakers include Mattia Vianello, Head of Energy Practical Action, Dr. Yashoda, Postdoctoral Fellow, International Water Management Institute, Vinito Gopal from Asar Social Impact Private Limited, and G. Sundarajan from Puvulagin, Nunbergal. Over to you, Olivier. And I would request all the participants to drop in their questions in the Q&A box or in the chat so that our moderator or our panelist can pick them up while the discussion is on. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to moderate this interesting panel. It's I think just a few words from my side as introduction. It's very important that we speak very openly about solar irrigation because it's often presented as a panacea. And honestly, based on my experience, there's no panacea in development, especially in agriculture development. So there are challenges, there are opportunities, and I think we should be very candid about those because this is the only way to develop a sustainable solar energy irrigation. And so this is kind of a request that I would have for the panelists, is that they be very honest about the pros and cons, the challenges they faced, but also the success stories and lessons learned. And with that, I would start with kind of a question to Dr. Yashoda from the International Water institute, and she's been working quite a lot on solar irrigation projects in the institute. And so I would ask her to explain us briefly what are her views on the performance of such systems. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver, and good afternoon and good morning, everyone. And I'm glad to be here to share my experience of working with the Skype program, which Deepak has just before presented. It's been implemented in Gujarat. I think one of the motivational a factor for Gujarat government to implement Sky is before that IMI has piloted a grid connected program with a few farmers, which is called a Dundi pilot. So which was done in Gujarat. So it got inspired, the Gujarat government got inspired with that pilot and start to make a bigger pilot program to see how the grid connected solar program works. So we have been in my position, I have been evaluating the programs, this Sky program. What we are doing right now is because this program also has a lot of data monitoring systems, which is what PM Kusum C has been already mentioned in the protocol, that any government which is going to implement the Kusum C will have to have a robust monitoring system. I think Sky already has that, which kind of gives a robust a laboratory for all the researchers to see how it's actually performing. So what we are trying to do with those remote monitoring data systems that has been developed in Sky is we are trying to look at how this distributed solar project is performing in terms of the general performance parameter for generation, how effective the solar generation is. And the second fold actually looks at as there is a general concern the solar irrigation might amplify the groundwater extraction further, and it will lead to further degradation of the groundwater. So we are also looking at that, how whether the farmers who have adopted Sky has any impact on their what energy consumption, which in turn will have will going to give us indication on the groundwater consumption. The first segment right now we are looking at is a generation part. So unlike in a centralized grid connected system where you have a robot one party holds it and the utility buys the energy, and there's a PPA agreement for the price. And since it's basically coming from the larger investors, big companies are investing, they keep the system so effectively that means they use remote cleaner, and the grid is so stable that they can always evacuate as long as they're able to generate the energy. But here in the distributed Sky is a distributed solar energy generation scheme, so which involves thousands of farmers who have the panels on the field where they are also cultivating the crops. Maybe sometimes they don't know about the technology, how to clean and how frequently to be cleaned, and maybe they might have trees around, maybe which might shade the panel and which might reduce the efficiency, because every unit has an opportunity cost in the grid connected solar. So our evidence indicates that there are all both utility as well as farmers as well as the solar agency which actually design this panels are responsible for effective performance of this panels. So coming to the utilities, basically we see we observe huge variation in the energy that is being generated per kilowatt. That means across the utility, I think Gujarat, Deepak also has in his paper, if you read through. So Gujarat has 4 regional utilities. All of them are the purchaser of this distributed solar energy that is being fed. So we see a large difference in the energy that has been generated per kilowatt. So why is the case? It's mainly because of the governance issue. How the utilities, some utilities have always been with the dealing with the agricultural sector. For example, some of the utilities have been selling, I think, quite a large amount of their energy to even before the solarization to the agriculture. So they know how nitty-gritties of how to manage the agricultural grid already, so that there is a lower grid voltage fluctuations. So there is a resilience in the agricultural grids. So in the utilities is where I think when they have less exposure with the agricultural consumers, so they have they manage to not maintain the grid resilience, which will lead to ultimately lead to energy loss, and which will be in turn loss of income to the farmer. So that's one side. I think coming to the farmer side, I think there is an awareness issue in terms of the panel cleaning. I think people are cleaning. In my data, I observe we did large survey with the farmers also. I do observe there is a large variation in terms of the how frequently they clean the panel. So I think there is a systematic effect of that on the performance of the plant, of the solar plant. Further, I think Sky also developed a robust a mobile application, so where farmer can use that application and see monitor their energy sitting at their home. So if there is if they can see in their phone there is a reduction in the energy generation, they can go and clean. Or maybe if there is an issue with some panel or inverter being not working, so they can call the officials and report the shutdown issues. But I observe that there are quite a few of them are using the Sky app, and that too coming from particular utilities. That means some utilities are really better in terms of governance and awareness, making an awareness to the farmer about how to manage the panels. I think the third aspect is also solar agencies are also involved. These are 3 stakeholders now. So the solar agencies have I think most of the PPAs does have this if there is a performance below certain level, the solar manufacturer has to compensate that loss for the farmer. But there is an issue with that. I mean, it's a good thing, because at the end, farmer is the one who is getting lost. But the thing is that there is no segregation of because of what issue. Is it because of the grid resilience, or is it because of the issues with the malfunctioning of the panels itself? So I think this monitoring system, not only for the data generation, but also monitoring system to segregate segregate the issues of different parties, and then compensation to be attached for that party is important. So that's the generation part. I think with the financial part, I think Deepak mentioned that there is an how much and timely payment of this income that they would get from the grid connection is important. I see even I read the court order and many other operational details of the SMC that the Tamil Nadu government is also doing. So most of this when they calculate the repayment period or financial viability, they consider average historical energy consumption of the farmers, and then they calculate, okay, this will be the within this month, this many years, farmers will going to pay off. But if you observe the historical energy data of farmers, there's a huge heterogeneity in terms of the energy consumption. Of course, the average is good, but I think people who are consuming above that particular amount for their pumping and cultivating crops, they will going to face an issue that they cannot able to repay the loan within that the limited period that has been set out. So I think the financial design that's going to come, I think, should include this option of taking the range of and historical energy consumption and then making a calculation on the financial part. With the, I think, second fold that we're working currently on the groundwater impact. So we are still looking, we are still monitoring, and there is a water team with us. We are still monitoring. So currently, I think it all depends on the incentive structure. So if there is an FIT which is high enough, some of the in certain area, I think since opportunity cost will be lower than the FITs, okay, then I think it works. So in certain area where there is a high commercial value crops that has been grown, so maybe an FITs may not be able to on par with the opportunity cost that the farmers have. So I think this needs to be considered. I think we are still working on that. Currently we don't see an historical change in the cropping pattern in the area being cultivated, but I think we are still further working on it. Yeah, thanks, Oliver.
Thank you for this overview of your experience. And I think it highlights, I think one thing that came out is that monitoring is important, because then you can point to where the problem is and basically who should work on it. But at the end of the day, it's a multi-stakeholder issue. And okay, I have some points to make, but I will restrain from doing that for the time being and keep to my moderator role. And having heard that, I would like to turn to Vinuta Gopal to have her views on the whole issue of solar irrigation in India. You can focus on grid solar irrigation, but if you also have similar lessons from off-grid, please bring them to the panel, to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olivia, and thank you, Deepak, for the presentation made, and to Divyam earlier on sort of the overview of the scenario of energy, agriculture, and water. I just wanted to clarify that what we've really looked at is bringing farmers as stakeholders into the conversation and understanding how they view this, especially in Tamil Nadu. So that's what I will be highlighting. Our interest definitely was when we started working on this issue, our interest was definitely to see how the decarbonization of the food and agriculture space could happen, and could happen faster. But very quickly, I think we realized how wicked a problem it is. It is not, as you said, Olivia, it's a complex issue, and the solutions are not necessarily as simple as providing a scheme with which can solarize water pumping. When we sort of studied the water situation in Tamil Nadu, it was an extremely grave situation. Groundwater use of agriculture accounts in Tamil Nadu for 92% of the groundwater utilization. And the state is also reeling under a fairly severe crisis when it comes to groundwater being overexploited. And therefore, we realized very quickly that if we were to engage on solarizing of water pumps, we cannot only engage on that. You have to address the water extraction issue. I think there were also comments and questions from the participants asking this question about what happens to water extraction. And of course, that issue is even more complex because it depends on the crops that are supported and so on and so forth, and farmer practices. I think so one definitely is that it is extremely important that the solarization schemes or solarizing water pumping does not go without addressing the challenges of water extraction. They have to, the solutions have to take into account water usage. The second thing that I think I'd like to say before I hand over to Sundar, who's from Tamil Nadu and has engaged much more closely on the issue, is that we also found that the farmers are extremely wary of solar. I think for the reasons Deepak pointed out, which is that they already have grid connections. And so they're very worried about what it means if they have to install solar. Do they lose the connection they currently have? There's a lot of sort of suspicion almost about what this means. And given that electricity is free, they're also very worried about the quality of what they will get from, even though the current quality is not necessarily 24/7, they're still extremely worried about what this option means. And if it is in some way a sort of a lesser form of accessing electricity. And this is a real sort of situation, which real perception that the farmers have. And therefore there's a fair challenge in terms of creating demand from the ground, from the farmers, if one is going down this route. So I will stop there and hand over to Sundar.
Thank you, Vinuta. And yes, I have the same question for Sundar actually. What's your take on the lessons about solar irrigation grid is the focus of this discussion, but also if you have on non-grid, off-grid.
Thanks, Oliver. Thanks, Vinita, and thank you, Deepak, for doing this. And it's a fantastic insight that you have provided to us, people who work on the ground. And as Vinita had pointed out, 92% of the agriculture sector, out of the groundwater that we consume, agriculture sector consumes about 92%. And we have got free electricity, though it is not stable or not available at when the farmers want. And in fact, it has more challenges also because we get a 3-phase electricity connection only during late nights or very early mornings, which the farmers generally, they try to switch on the motors when they go out of the field. And when the electricity comes, it generally automatically starts pumping the water. And if the farmers go there to the field during late night or early mornings, there is a menace of snake bites, and we get people who with snake bites due to they're reaching out to fields in the early mornings or late night. So that's a more menace in this. However, the scheme of solarization of agricultural pumps, it needs a lot of introspection from a Tamil Nadu perspective. The cure should not be worse than the disease. We should be very careful in implementing this scheme. We need to take on board the farmers. Because out of all the, especially there's a water stress in the western and northern districts of Tamil Nadu. 54% of our electricity consumption that happens in agriculture sector, it's consumed by about 10 districts, which are mostly in the northern western part of the state. Out of this districts, 6 to 8 districts, 8 districts consume about 54% of the total agricultural load. Out of these 8 districts, 6 find themselves in the list of water stressed districts of Tamil Nadu. It has got about 10 districts which are much water stressed, out of which 6 find mention in that. So it is like, so wherever there is water stressed, so there is more of electricity consumption. People are talking about creating rigs, deep borewell rigs, which will run for about 2,000 feet to take water for agricultural purposes. So when we roll out or when we do a campaign for these things, then the strategy should be multi-pronged. Like first is the recharge structures, percolation pits, that needs to be strengthened, and that needs to be taken care of. On the demand side, it is basically the kind of crops, because we find people who still use water intensive crops in most water stressed districts. So we have to do much larger campaigns for the kind of crops that the farmers would choose. So it is not just plain RE intervention in irrigation. It's not just that. It is the mindset, it's the cultural habit of people, farmers. It is the users' involvement in this whole discussion or narrative of taking solar to irrigation. It's not just. So we should be very careful in framing some schemes which will disincentivize the farmers to extract groundwater. That is a more of a challenge here. When they have water at a much deeper 2,000 feet or 2,500 feet. I saw a news item some 2-3 months back where they are building bore wells that can drill down to 2,000 feet in Namakkal, which is western district of Tamil Nadu. So when the water is so stressed and we are going deeper and deeper, I think we have to be very, very careful in rolling out Kusum scheme for solar irrigation. So it's both. It is on one side, it is the surface water treat. How we handle surface water, the recharge structures like lakes and ponds, recharging tube bore wells. On the other side, it is also the crop patterns and the way we cultivate and way we do agriculture has to be completely comprehensively relooked before we actually can roll out in a major way. Otherwise, this scheme will become another scheme that will not be of interest to farmers, because today farmers, yes, there are questions about that, but today farmers get free electricity, whether they use it for 2 hours a day or for 8 hours a day, and the connection is free. So in a scheme like Kusum, where the beneficiary contribution is also there, which is about 30%, if I'm not correct, around 30%. The beneficiary contribution is there. So what is the incentive that the farmers will get? See, on the one side, I get free electricity, but the other side, I have to pay 30% of some 3.5-4 lakh rupees as a beneficiary contribution to get a solar pump. So what is the incentive that I get? So how do we subsidize that, the beneficiary component? And also, how do we incentivize the farmer he or she doesn't use the solar pumps for over exploitation of water? So how do we do all those things is very key to make this scheme a successful one. I would like to close my remarks there.
Thank you very much, Sundar. I think you took some words out of my mouth. The whole issue is not just about the water, it's about also the crops. And, you know, water stressed adapted varieties of wheat or the usual crops, that's one way, but also crop diversification. Of course, if you plant trees, then you may have too much shade for the solar panels. And something that I think, Vinuta, you touched upon is the farmer being organized, but also what I haven't heard is water user associations, which I think then puts all the stakeholders together, because as I said, it's a wicked problem. I think Vinuta mentioned that, but also it's a multi-stakeholder issue. And so I think you pointed out the solution of feed-in tariff has been the only one mentioned to address overexploitation. And this for me is already a challenge, because who pays for the feed-in tariff? They don't want to pay too much because otherwise they go bust. So there is a bit of an issue, and it's a multi-stakeholder. And I wonder if we could not think about other solutions than feed-in tariffs. And with that, I would like to move on to take advantage that in the panel, we also have somebody who has experience beyond India, and is from Mattia Vianello, is from Practical Action. And Practical Action has a lot of experience in India, but also outside India. So Mattia, based on what you've heard and kind of the provocations that I've been putting, and also some of others have been putting, do you have the solutions from India, your Practical Action experience in India, but also outside India? I don't mean solutions, but maybe, you know, ways of addressing these challenges.
Many thanks, Olivier, and hi, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I will start by saying I have no solutions, which will save us all, but I think I have some suggestions. At least I'd be happy to bring some of our experiences in, or some of the learnings from our experiences working across, 3 continents, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America in the last 50 years, the areas of energy access, agriculture, and climate change. And, myself, I come from the energy access space, and my experience has been mostly in Sub-Saharan Africa. And there really the topic has been very much faced and addressed by the energy access groups. And I think this has been a big limitation, because when we look and when we hear also from this panel, you really need to start from the agriculture side, understand the specific context, smallholder farmers, the specific value chains, the crops we're talking about. Maybe just to frame a bit the conversation, just to bring the Sub-Saharan African context, 80% of food production in Sub-Saharan Africa comes from farms which are less than 2 hectares. So this makes about 95 million smallholder farmers. And of those, 60% are subsistence farmers, which means they're not making a money income with their products, but they're just making a living. So just to extract some other data from a report from Efficiency for Access, less than 1% of those farmers can currently access, of those who need it, can currently purchase or access a solar pump. And so the potential is huge, because 12% of irrigation potential in Sub-Saharan Africa, only 12% of irrigation potential is developed, but only 1% of smallholder farmers can currently purchase a pump. So our approach has been, and has really developed over the years, learning and bringing together our agriculture and energy work. And as I say, we really need to start from agriculture and the needs of smallholder farmers' needs. But then at the same time, trying to understand how to build the markets for energy products as well, because in Sub-Saharan Africa, there is a if you look at East Africa, there's been a huge progress in the last 10 years around off-grid applications, but productive usage energy applications, including solar pumps, are just starting to get there. And those markets are very different. If you look at countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, Kenya is very advanced compared to other countries like maybe Malawi or Senegal. And so you really need to understand the different areas and challenges in those countries. At the same time, develop those markets while you are also understanding the needs from farmers. But also at the same time, you don't want to push those technologies in a way which causes more damage, like in areas, for example, of the Sahel, where water resources are limited. You really need to ensure that there are the appropriate agricultural practices brought in place when those technologies are brought in. So energy, could definitely help grow more food and make production more resilient to climate change. But of course, there are some cautions to be made. And I mean, there are key challenges, I think, that we have seen across our programs, our work, and I'm sure most of them also apply to India. But I think that those are very specific to Sub-Saharan Africa, with some generalization, of course, because the continent is variety. So on the supply side, when I talk about supply side, I mean the distributors of technology, solar pumps, but also some of the other technologies which can really are identified as key in the agricultural space, like for example the storage, so cold storage, and also processing, are really adapted to local context, and remain a big challenge to reach the last mile, the distribution channels there. Also on the demand side, there are huge barriers. A lot of farmers are unaware of the opportunities. Often they lack the skills, and also there are cultural constraints that may make them reluctant to adopt those technologies. When they get them, might not have the right knowledge of how to shape their agricultural practices to make the best out of them. And of course, a key challenge on the demand the key challenge remain affordability and the upfront cost of those technologies. So while we see some, incredible innovations coming up, someone mentioned pay-go solar pumps before, or other innovations, the financial schemes, the capital cost of those technologies remains a big barrier for a large proportion of farmers in Sub-Saharan Africa. And the ways you can reduce this is like they're doing in Senegal, they cut VAT on solar pumps, and other policies are necessary to make this, subsidies, which we're discussing in India. I mean, from my knowledge, only in Togo, there are some programs to subsidize solar pumps, for example. So those are important area. I mean, we've been working on adopting an approach which is very systemic. So really identifying, looking at those different barriers across the demand, agricultural sector, the market of technologies, linking that together and trying also to bring in these practices in terms of regenerative agriculture. And we've done this in different ways. So some of the learning I can bring here, which is always relevant to the context, but perhaps we can try to extract it beyond. In Zimbabwe, we tried, and I think we demonstrated that farmers, once they understand how to adopt the regenerative agricultural practices, when the right business mentorship is brought in, they make them those commercially viable with those new renewable energy technologies. In Malawi, we are trying to demonstrate how to make solar pumps inclusive, so also affordable by farmers which are not just the higher tier. And some of the learnings are coming out. It's the project ongoing, funded by FCDO through the Transforming Energy Access Initiative. Is that those can work when there are markets, agricultural markets in place to absorb the surplus of products which they are growing through those pumps. Because I didn't mention it before, often people produce more, but if they don't have market to absorb that doesn't bring anything. And also in terms of financing, which is, I repeat, probably the highest barrier right now, when there is a suitable patient source of credit, in this case is a rent-to-own scheme, which, particularly favorable approach for the technology, then people, in this case are women farmers, can pay back for the pumps in about 4 years. So there are different areas, and of course there is a lot of work, and the difference within India seems huge. I think I was looking at the market size. I think the one of India is about 5 times bigger than one for the whole Sub-Saharan Africa at the moment. However, the potential for Sub-Saharan Africa is to triple in the next 10 years. why I was looking at for India, because of, if subsidies go down, this might reduce a bit. But just to close here, Olivier, and then happy to answer any question. So just to say that I think solar irrigation and other productive uses of energy, renewable energy in agriculture have the potential to really achieve this, triple wins of like poverty reduction, climate change adaptation, and mitigation. The systemic approach, I think Ute from IRENA spoke about that, and also Vinuta spoke about that, and also you, Olivier, and others. Bringing together, understanding the role of different stakeholders from energy, agriculture, markets, and farmers' side, and bring them together and really try to tackle it from different spaces at the same time. And also, just to close, just to remark on this, that adoption of those technologies is not sufficient on its own, and really must be combined with the climate smart or like sustainable agriculture practices, regenerative agriculture or other ones, to really get the best trade-offs out of those, of bringing all this together. I'll close here, and thanks again for the opportunity to bring this perspective.
Thanks, Mattia, for your views from sub-Saharan Africa. Some aspects are common to India, some are kind of specific, because in this case, we're talking about grid systems. In your case, it's primarily off-grid, but some aspects are common. I mean, in sub-Saharan Africa, you may not have over-exploitation of too much yet, but if you multiply, the solar irrigation system, it might come, and especially in Sahelian countries. I would like to throw a question to you, all people from the panel. The solar panels that I use for individual farmers, do you have any experience of grouping them at a farmer cooperative level, so that then just the energy is distributed and the solar panels are managed by people who know how to manage solar panels? And the reason why I'm saying that is that then you can use these solar panels not only for agriculture, but let's say to power local clinics. You can use your solar energy for different things than agriculture. And the reason why I throw this on the table is it's a way to address the overpumping risk in another way than feed-in tariffs. And maybe that doesn't make any sense to you, but I'm just throwing this on the table because in many places where you don't have grid energy, you need off-grid energy, and solar panels can do a lot of things, not only for agriculture. Of course, the focus here is grid energy, so it may not apply, but beyond the grid and solar energy, I think there's a point in maybe thinking of not having every farmer having his panels, because then it becomes a water user association issue. It becomes a social aspect, and the energy companies might also have a better say in that. And I'm just throwing this, maybe it doesn't make sense, but what is your take on this kind of issue? Because I keep attending webinars and things about the risk of overpumping of solar energy and feed-in tariffs being the only solution, with all the challenges related to that, if it's commercial crops or staple crops and so on. But I'm thinking beyond that solution. Over to you.
I could maybe begin with this. So the schemes in India do actually have this provision of the farmer cooperative also setting up a larger size plant at the substation from where all the feeders to individual farmers emanate. And that they classify it as, so the classification wise, they call it a grouped system. So that provision is definitely there. I personally am not aware of whether people have opted for this kind of grouping over the other, but my sense would be that wouldn't a farmer having his or her own individual pump set have more control over how much water is extracted, how much electricity is pumped in, rather than a cooperative whose focus might only be about exporting more energy to the grid. So that control aspect, I feel at an individual level might be better with the farmer, but happy to hear other thoughts as
well. Can I just add? Sorry.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So yeah, I do have the same perspective. I think there was some evidence from IFPRI where they have evaluated this community-owned solar pumps. So they've also found that this control mechanisms of like how much being used is going to be an issue, and there will be an light capture with that. They have found out. There is also, I think, IMI is also piloting in Nepal. So the way that you said, because the pumps are very small in size in Nepal, so they are aggregating at one point. But I think they are not using it for the alternative energy, because that would require them to make an additional investment in terms of how to use for the purpose. I think what they are doing is they are aggregating the panel at one point, and they're selling that to the grid, basically electrical grids, and based on the contribution that each farmer had for that group size, a group of the panel, they'll get paid from the utility. There was some discussion in Bangladesh about this alternative energy usage. Through IMI, I think we had funded few of the innovation grants. What they are using is this additional, they didn't aggregate it, but I think because the panel sizes have already been very big, because it was funded by the sponsors, they're using because and also the average days that is been used in a year in Bangladesh is about 120 days. So rest of the years it is empty. So they're using that to raise the chicken, basically under the panel they're raising chicken and doing other milling purpose for the allied activities within agriculture. But they're not aggregated, but they're using it for the alternative purpose where the grid availability doesn't exist.
Thank you. Any other panelists would like to add something?
Maybe Olivier, if you can add please, Vinuta.
No, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Go ahead. Ladies first.
Yeah, no, but I think it's a very interesting idea, because I think the problem that solarizing the electricity needs for agriculture is really an energy solution, and not a solution that farmers are asking for or want. So I think so I think the interesting aspect of what you're suggesting is that we recognize this as solving a problem of energy supply and approach it in that manner, in which case it actually removes sort of behavioral aspects from an agriculture perspective. And we address that as well separately. So I think it is a very interesting proposition. And the reliance on farmers to uptake this as a solution, I think, is quite a heavy burden on an already sort of stressed farmer. So I think actually it's a good proposition to remove that and actually address this as what it is, which is an energy solution.
If I may jump in there. If you have individual farmers in control, you also have the whole variability of farmers and the way they extract and so on, and this is difficult to manage. And if farmers have a guaranteed supply of water, they don't, and I think this is a way to address the fact that they are in control might be a problem. That's this way, because they might overpump and so on without people being able to monitor properly. If they are, I'm comparing to the biogas system in India, where you have a collective, a company dealing with biogas at the village level, and there's guaranteed biogas to the household. So if farmers get a guaranteed amount of water, they may not bother about energy. Of course, they won't make the money, but the cooperative can make the money from feed-in tariff and redistribute the dividends to the farmers. It's a different way of approaching. I understand the farmers, they want guarantees, but they can have the guarantees. Okay, Mattia, I cut you.
Interesting, Olivier. Now maybe just to bring in the perspective of an off-grid place. I mean, I think we've looked at that. Again, you start from understanding what are the energy needs of those smallholder farmers or rural communities, and then you try to understand what are the least cost options for electrification to fulfill their needs, whether they are agricultural needs, household needs, etc. So you might come up with solutions which are like through a mini grid or standalone systems. So when you look at mini grid, and we work on that, like for example in Zimbabwe, I think in a way you can, if you are good in the designing and sizing, you can pre-design that. I think the challenges always often comes in that people, I think even us, we learn this the hard way. The type of consultations you need to do, the assessments before, and bring all those needs together is very hard to do in a proper way. To then deliver the right energy services, for example, for irrigation and other ones. And then the management ownership of the system at the center, it also is difficult to do. Yeah. So there are, I think, some of the private companies, like for example in Kenya, who are doing this quite well with mini grids. Although I think they're also, struggling to find the right business model to make it work with solar irrigation. Also because when you're connecting smallholder farmers, which are a bit far away from each other, the cost of distribution adds up. So you go back at the least cost option, and then the standalone solar pump comes in. Interestingly, we got we are currently developing this practical action with a partner, a concept or an idea exactly using the excess energy from solar pumps, standalone solar pumps, because we saw some data on that, and it's quite high, the number. Now I can't remember the figures, but the number of kilowatt hour which are not used is very high, and you can actually, there is an add-on there. So there are opportunities, but I think also there, trade-offs are hiding, and the challenge, as always, is to find the right balance between those trade-offs.
I think there's, okay, I think we came to the end of the panel. I think we have 5 minutes for the closing, and I think Irina or WRI would like to do the closing. If I may try to wrap up the discussions, which I think was very interesting, because we started from the field evidence, and people were very open, as I was requesting, in terms of the challenges but also possible solutions. And I think the problem is not so much technical. I think we understand it's not technical. It is partly financial for the farmer to afford solar systems, off-grid systems and solar pumps. But there are solutions. There are solutions to that. But also in terms of the operation financing for the energy companies, it is a challenge to pay the feed-in tariff the right price that the farmers want, and farmers are usually quite not happy with what they get in terms of financing of funds. And but it's also social. It's also beyond the financing aspect. It's multi-stakeholder. It's maybe a grouping of farmers talking to the energy companies, talking to the government. It's a wicked problem. It's a multi-stakeholder issue, and it's not only about irrigation. It's about starting from the farm, from the crops, because if we keep promoting the same kind of crops and the same varieties just by saying you'll have guaranteed irrigation for free, then it might be detrimental. It might not be sustainable, like Sundar was very nicely putting. So we may also look at water stressed adapted varieties, diversification of crops, not just one crop. And with that, I think if any last remarks from the panelists, otherwise we'll hand over to WRI and Irina for the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the distinguished panelists and Olivia for a very engaging panel discussion. There are still some questions in the chat box, and if any of the speakers would like to answer them, you may please go ahead and do so. I would now request Sandhya Sundararaghavan to share the closing remarks. Sandhya is the lead for energy transitions at WRI India. Over to you, Sandhya.
Thank you so much, Aruna. I think it was quite interesting to be part of this discussion, and just would like to kind of give some wrapping points on this. Olivia has already given like a summary of the panel discussion. And I think it started from the point where Namrata provided her opening remarks on the energy, water, agriculture nexus, and the relationship between electricity supply and the irrigation part becomes quite critical. So the approach towards using water economically is going to determine how resilient the food production system is going to be. And the deployment of solar irrigation pumps can increase farm income as well as the productivity. So what the common thread that came across was that the solar-based energy inputs can actually help in decarbonizing the food production systems, and it can also help in facilitating the clean energy markets. Ms. Hote rightfully mentioned that RE solutions provide opportunities in a decentralized manner across food value chain, and solar is at that intersection point where we need to see things more holistically. Divyam shared challenges, particularly two challenges. One of them was that the energy gap needs to be filled up across agri value chain in order to reduce losses and to increase income. And the second most important point is how do we engage in energy transition discussion to improve resilience? One of the important points that also came across was the solar pump has seen a growth due to supportive policies, but then there is that significant untapped potential that it still remains. So there is need for financial instruments, capacity building, packaging that energy and water efficient solutions, after sales support, and finally fostering that innovation and flexibility in delivering solar irrigation schemes. Deepak shared his insights from different solarization schemes which were analyzed by WRI team in select states. And one of the important things that came across was that the appropriate pricing of FIT is important. It's also the timely and full payout of subsidy, which helps in bringing out that trust. Maintenance of PV systems should also be included in the schemes, and there should be fairly good monitoring, valuation, and learning frameworks to evaluate these schemes, which ties in with what Dr. Yashoda mentioned about the SKY scheme, where there is a robust remote monitoring system to see how the distributed solar generation is performing, and looking at impact on groundwater depletion and energy consumption that's already being done. The interesting thing that came across was the mobile app, which is currently in place to help farmers monitor their energy and panel performance. Vinuta brought out the important issue, especially ground up, that it's important that the solarization of pumps does not go without addressing the extraction of water issues, and it should take into account the water usage. So there is going to be this challenge ground up regarding how farmers are going to adopt the scheme. And Sundarajan also echoed that when we roll out the scheme, the recharge structure, percolation pits should be taken care of, and the cropping pattern, especially along with RE and awareness, so that everybody is on board, needs to be looked at. Mattia shared his experience across different regions and spoke about how we need to build markets for energy and also understand farmer needs. So there needs to be those conducive policies to subsidize solar pumps. Agriculture markets need to be in place, and finally financing schemes which are affordable can actually help the farmer uptake and adoption. So some of the areas which collectively we felt which can be worked on is, one of the most important thing is we need to address farmer concerns so that there is the adoption rate and the uptake from farmer side increases. One of the points that was deliberated upon was, can this be more like an energy supply solution? And maybe we can look at community-based systems, either through mini grid or standalone systems. So obviously the designing and sizing is going to be important, and we need to look at opportunities and trade-offs. Second most important thing which needs to be looked at is a water stress and extraction issue that needs to be looked at along with designing and talking about these solar schemes. Financing schemes, designing of the financing scheme is also equally important. And finally, all of these needs to come together. So more like a systemic approach where farmers, markets, technologies, financing, policies, everything needs to be in place. And we need to look at this from a multi-stakeholder issue, like Olivia rightly concluded, and we need to have a more systemic approach. So with that, would like to close this session and would like to thank everyone, thank the panelists, thank the speakers for their time and sharing their inputs. Over to you, Hona.
Thank you so much, Sandhya, for concluding the session with your wonderful remarks. I would like to end this webinar by thanking all the participants and all the distinguished panelists and speakers. And before we end, I would just request all the speakers to please switch on your video so that we can take a quick screen grab for social media. Thank you so much. And for any query, please do mail us on indiaenergyteam@wri.org. All the posts will be available on our social media handles, and the video recording is going to be there on YouTube. Thank you so much once again. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.